Remember back before the war in Ukraine, when the world was obsessed with lockdowns? Remember how it was all about benevolent leaders trying to keep you, the public, safe against the coronavirus pandemic, stopping the spread, flattening the curve, and reducing the virus's death toll? Well, guess what? Lockdowns are back, baby! Not here, but in China, where Shanghai is undergoing, or enduring rather, perhaps the strictest lockdown we've seen anywhere around the world during this pandemic, now that most of us in the West have slowly realized that it is okay to live with the virus. Funnily enough now, we are seeing the exact opposite happen in Shanghai, and we can now see what happened to us in a whole new light. So what is the Chinese government trying to achieve by locking down a bustling, vibrant city of 26 million people? And again, how does this differ, really, if at all, to the reasons why we also endured lockdowns here in the supposedly liberal democratic West? Let's find out as we go, busting the narrative. Ah, Shanghai, Pearl of the Orient, once one of the great commercial centers of China, known for its shipping, its culture, its intrigue, the glamour of the Bund, and its bustling back streets. But listen to the city's residents now as they weep and cry from their prison cell apartments. Now, in year 3 of the pandemic, Shanghai is an absolute nightmare, with food shortages, riots, and authorities killing people's pets, all in the name of enforcing COVID-0. Have a look at this report from the New York Post, which reported that, quote, nearly all of Shanghai's 26 million residents have been confined at home since last week as the city aims to test, trace, and centrally quarantine all people who test positive for the virus amid the spread of the highly infectious Omicron variant. This has meant, among other things, that people in apartment blocks have had to band together to buy food. Babies who test positive are being ripped off their parents to be isolated God knows where. Robots and drones are patrolling the streets to tell people to stay indoors and control their soul's desire for freedom. And authorities murdering dogs, yes, dogs, pet dogs, lest they be incubators for the dreaded virus. The atrocities go on and on and on. The government-controlled media in China has explained its decision this way. Quote, the key to winning the battle against the epidemic is to adhere to the general dynamic zero-COVID policy without hesitation and unswervingly implement the guidance to cope with the ravaging virus. Sound familiar? Does to me, because it sounds very similar to what Australian politicians were saying in 2020 and 2021.
We are going to go hard and we are going to go early, and we are doing this to keep Queenslanders safe.
We've got no choice but to take these very, very difficult steps.
The permit system will be effective from next Saturday, but obviously between now and then, police can stop you and seek evidence for what you're doing, and if you're doing the wrong thing, you'll have those extra fines imposed.
We need to do everything we can to protect our way of life. That's why from midnight tonight, Perth and Peel will enter a 3-day lockdown.
It all sounds a bit crazy now, though, don't you think? And remember what happened in Victoria? There, protesters were pepper sprayed, choked, hit with non-lethal projectiles, body slammed to the ground, and worse. Pregnant women were arrested in front of their children for having liked the wrong post on social media about a lockdown protest. Sounds very Chinese social credit to me. And yet the state of Victoria still experienced the worst COVID outcomes around Australia. It was the same around the world. In America, New York City suffered a far worse death rate than Florida, which had a much more elderly population and was also mocked for not locking down hard enough. Same thing across the Atlantic. The United Kingdom engaged in some of the most severe lockdowns in Europe and suffered far more deaths than Sweden, which didn't lock down at all. Of course, China set the bar for the COVID response, releasing footage of people dropping in the streets, then locking them in their homes, a model that we in the West, to our great shame, followed. Now, though, the Omicron strain of the virus is far less virulent, yet the Chinese government is still pretending it's 2020. And in Shanghai, they are shutting down the city for what is now, for most people, basically the flu, although they would never admit that, of course. The brittleness of the communist system makes it even harder to switch from total panic mode to living with the virus than even in, say, Dan Andrews' Victoria or, Andrew Cuomo's New York. An obedient scribe at the Global Times wrote this on April 11th. Quote, he said, "Some specious voices have come out at a critical juncture when China's epidemic prevention and control is facing difficulties. They advocated that, quote, the Omicron is a big flu and that countries such as the US and the UK are successfully coexisting with the virus. In public opinion, they have tried to create a prosperous scene that Western countries have completely gotten rid of the interference of the epidemic. And they have even regarded this as a victory of the West's herd immunity. But these arguments are utterly groundless, morally and scientifically," the Global Times went on. Now, read from outside China, that paragraph almost sounds like the Chinese government congratulating us for having moved on from those dark days of lockdown, don't you think? Feels pretty good, right? I mean, who'd want to be in Shanghai right now? But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? If Shanghai looks like one giant prison now, how do we feel about the way we were locked down throughout 2020 and 2021? Was it worth it? In hindsight, the politicians who locked us down and locked us up for much of the past 2 years had far more in common with Xi Jinping and his communist cronies in Shanghai today than they had with traditional values of Western liberty and individual responsibility and liberalism that they claim to adhere and uphold. Locking down and locking out the entire world is a great way for Xi Jinping, of course, to turn his country inward at a difficult time in his leadership in a way that China has done at a number of points in its history. But let's not forget, and not for a moment think, that we in the West are better than China. Because again, do not forget, everything that is happening in Shanghai today is just an expanded, more extreme version of what the elite in the West wanted to happen to you. And if you listen to them still talking about cases, what many of them still want to happen to you today. And that is something that we should never, ever let them forget. Thanks for watching. I'm James Morrow. And if you'd like to support this channel, please like, share, and subscribe below. And I'll see you next week for more Busting the Narrative.